The Key to a Hidden Past, Chapter 1. My great-aunt Beatrice was a woman shrouded in mystery. She lived in a grand old house on the edge of town, a place I had visited only a handful of times as a child. She was a distant figure, elegant and reserved, someone who seemed to belong to a different era. My contact with her was minimal, limited to the occasional holiday card and brief, formal interactions at family gatherings that felt stiff and awkward. I knew very little about her life, her history, or the source of her apparent wealth. She was simply Great Aunt Beatrice, a distant relative who existed on the periphery of my world. When her lawyer contacted me after her passing, I was surprised. More surprised still when he informed me that I was the sole beneficiary of her rather substantial estate. Her house, her financial assets, everything was left to me. I was 58 years old, a widow of 3 years, with a modest life and grown children. An unexpected inheritance of this magnitude felt overwhelming, almost unreal. I traveled to her town, a few hours away, to meet with the lawyer and begin the daunting task of sorting through her affairs and her house. The house itself was magnificent, filled with antique furniture, dusty portraits, and the lingering scent of lavender and old paper. It felt like stepping back in time, into a life I knew nothing about. The lawyer, a stern but helpful man named Mr. Abernathy, explained the details of the will. Everything was straightforward, or so it seemed, but then he handed me a small, velvet-lined box. Your great-aunt Beatrice left specific instructions regarding this, he said, his voice formal. It is to be given to you directly, and you are to open it alone after you have had a chance to settle in. Intrigued, I took the box. It was heavy, felt old, and important. What could be in it that required such specific instructions? Jewels? A last personal message? I waited until I was alone in the grand, silent house that was now mine. The setting sun cast long shadows across the ornate living room. With a sense of trepidation and curiosity, I opened the velvet box. Inside, nestled on the faded lining, were 2 items: a small, intricately carved wooden key and a single, sealed envelope made of thick, creamy paper, addressed to me in Great Aunt Beatrice's elegant, spidery handwriting. I picked up the key first. It felt cool and smooth in my hand, its carvings tiny and precise. It looked like the key to a small box or a locked drawer, not a door. Then I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. The same elegant handwriting filled the page. My dearest Eleanor, the letter began. Eleanor, not Clara, my name. Was this letter not for me? Had the lawyer made a mistake? But the envelope was addressed to me. I continued reading, the confusion mounting. If you are reading this, it means I am no longer able to bear the weight of what I have carried. For many years, I have kept a secret, a truth buried deep within the walls of this house, a truth about our family, about our fortune, about a wrong that was committed long ago. The key you hold is the key to that truth. It opens the small mahogany box hidden in the study, behind the 3rd panel from the left in the fireplace mantel. Inside that box, you will find the journals and documents that tell the full story. The story of how a part of our family's wealth was acquired, a story of injustice and betrayal. It is a heavy burden, Eleanor, a legacy I've lived with for decades, unable to fully atone. I leave this to you, Eleanor, because I believe you have a strong moral compass. I believe you will understand the gravity of what you find, and that you will have the courage to do what is right. The wronged party or their descendants deserve to know the truth, and perhaps to receive some form of restitution for what was taken. It is a difficult path, my dear, a path that may bring pain and discomfort, but it is a path that leads to truth, to justice, and perhaps to a clearing of the conscience that has been burdened for too long. The key is yours now, Eleanor. The choice of what to do with the truth is also yours. With deepest hope and a heavy heart, your great-aunt Beatrice. My hands trembled as I finished reading. Eleanor. The wrong name again. But the message was clearly for me. A hidden box, journals, documents, a story of injustice and betrayal. A wrong committed, a fortune tainted, and a responsibility placed upon me, a legacy of guilt and a call to do what was right. A hidden mahogany box in the study, behind the fireplace mantel. The intricate wooden key was its key. Despite the wrong name, the message was clear. Great-aunt Beatrice had entrusted me with a secret, a dark chapter in our family history, and the responsibility of confronting it. The grand house, the unexpected fortune, it was all connected to this hidden truth. The grandeur of the house suddenly felt less impressive, overshadowed by the weight of Great-aunt Beatrice's words, the hint of a past injustice. The air in the room felt heavy, thick with unspoken history. I had to find that box. I had to know the truth. Chapter 2. The study was a large, imposing room, lined with bookshelves filled with old leather-bound volumes. A grand fireplace dominated one wall, its mantelpiece made of dark, polished mahogany. My heart pounded with a mixture of trepidation and urgency as I approached it. Great-aunt Beatrice's letter and the small wooden key clutched in my hand. Behind the third panel from the left, the letter had said. I ran my fingers along the smooth wood, counting from the left. 1, 2, 3. I pressed gently on the third panel. It felt solid, unyielding. I pressed harder, searching for a hidden catch or mechanism. Nothing happened. Was I in the wrong place? Had I misunderstood the instructions? Doubt began to creep in, a familiar companion to the irrationality of this entire situation. I reread the letter, looking for any subtle clues I might have missed. The small mahogany box hidden in the study, behind the third panel from the left, in the fireplace mantel. It seemed clear enough. I examined the panel more closely. There were intricate carvings along the edge. Could the mechanism be hidden within the carving? I ran my fingers over the details, pressing, prodding, searching for a way to open it. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The silence of the house pressed in on me. Just as I was about to give up, convinced I had misinterpreted the instructions or that the mechanism was broken, my finger brushed against a tiny, almost invisible seam within the carving. I pressed there, and with a faint click, the panel sprang inward slightly, revealing a narrow opening. Behind the panel, nestled in a hidden cavity within the wall, was a small, dark mahogany box. It was old, its wood worn, and it had a small, intricate lock. The wooden key in my hand fit perfectly into the lock. My hands trembled as I turned the key. The lock clicked open. I lifted the lid of the box, my heart hammering against my ribs. Inside, as the letter had promised, were several old, leather-bound journals and a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. The air inside the box carried a faint scent of old paper and something else, a hint of regret. I took the journals out carefully. They were smaller than the box, fitting snugly inside. The top journal was dated 1918. My great-aunt Beatrice would have been a young woman then, in her early 20s, the same age I was when I was making monumental life choices. I settled into the armchair by the fireplace, the setting sun casting long shadows, and began to read. The early entries, like those in my previous story, were typical of a young woman of that era. But soon, a different tone emerged. References to the difficult times, the aftermath of the First World War, the struggle for financial stability, and then a story of a secret love. Entries about a young man named Thomas, a gifted craftsman, an artist, with whom she shared a deep connection, a dream of building a life together. Their love was passionate, but faced opposition from her family, a family of established wealth and social standing. Thomas was considered unsuitable, not good enough for a woman from their family. My great-grandmother, Beatrice's mother, seemed to be a dominant figure in the journals. Her disapproval of Thomas a constant theme. There were entries about hushed arguments, about pressure to end the relationship, about the importance of marrying well, of maintaining the family's reputation and fortune. Then, a significant event. An uncle passed away unexpectedly, leaving a substantial inheritance. A legal dispute arose over the will, a challenge from a distant relative. The journals became more cryptic, filled with fragmented thoughts, hints of a difficult decision my great-grandmother and Beatrice were facing, a decision related to the inheritance, to Thomas, to the future. August 15th, 1922. The lawyers say there's a way, a loophole, a piece of evidence that could secure the inheritance, the fortune. But it would mean betraying him, betraying Thomas, using something against him, something that would ruin his name, his reputation. Mother says it's the only way for the family. For our future, if we don't secure the inheritance, everything is at risk. Our way of life. But Thomas, the thought of hurting him, of using his vulnerability against him, it is unbearable. My heart is broken. Is this the price of fortune? The price of family duty? The pieces began to fit together, forming a devastating picture. The inheritance dispute, the loophole, the betrayal of Thomas. My family, my great-grandmother and great-aunt Beatrice, had used something against Thomas, something that would ruin his name, his reputation, in order to secure their claim to the inheritance that formed the foundation of our family's fortune. The betrayal of Thomas, a man great-aunt Beatrice loved. They had sacrificed his reputation, his future, for financial gain, for the family's fortune. The guilt she wrote about in her letter to me, the weight she had carried, it was the weight of this betrayal, this act of injustice committed against the man she loved, and the name in the letter, Eleanor, my name. Why did she address the letter to me using my name when it was clearly about her and her past? Unless a startling possibility began to form in my mind, one that connected the past to the present in a way I could never have imagined. What if the name Eleanor in the letter wasn't a mistake? What if it was deliberate? What if it was a clue? My name is Clara. But my middle name? My mother's first name is Eleanor. Clara Eleanor Davis, my full name. And Thomas, the man Great-Aunt Beatrice loved, the man they betrayed. He was a gifted craftsman, an artist. Could there be a connection to my own life, to my love for art, to the feeling of being drawn to things of beauty? The letter, addressed to Eleanor, given to Clara. The story of betrayal against the man named Thomas. My own life, a quiet life, but with a deep, private love for art, for beauty. And the name Thomas, the name of my late husband, it felt like the universe was whispering secrets, weaving together threads of past and present in ways I couldn't yet fully grasp. Chapter 3. The threads of the past were beginning to intertwine with the present in a way that was both terrifying and deeply intriguing. The hidden journals revealed Great-Aunt Beatrice's secret love for Thomas, a gifted artist and craftsman, and the agonizing choice she and my great-grandmother made to betray him, to use something against him to secure their fortune. The name Eleanor in her letter to me, my middle name, felt significant, a deliberate clue. And the name Thomas, the man they wronged, the name of my late husband, seemed like a cruel echo across the decades. I continued reading the journals, trying to understand the full extent of the betrayal. The details were sparse, clouded by my great-aunt's guilt and fear. It involved a piece of evidence, something related to Thomas's work or reputation that was used to discredit him, to weaken his claim to the inheritance. The journals hinted at it being a lie, a distortion of the truth, crafted by Mr. Hayes, the family lawyer at the time, to serve my family's interests. The legacy of this betrayal was clear. My family's fortune was built, at least in part, on the ruin of Thomas's name, his reputation, his potential claim to an inheritance that might have changed his life. The journals followed Great-Aunt Beatrice's life after the betrayal. Her heartbreak over losing Thomas, her guilt over her part in the injustice. She never married, never seemed to find the same depth of connection she had shared with him. She lived a life of quiet elegance, but the weight of the secret was always there, a shadow beneath the surface. The letters in the mahogany box were from Mr. Hayes to my great-grandmother and great-aunt Beatrice. They were formal, discussing legal strategies, evidence, and the successful outcome of the inheritance dispute. But the language felt cold, devoid of any human cost, focused solely on the legal victory and the financial gain. Reading them, knowing the truth behind the clinical legal terms, sent a shiver down my spine. My great-aunt's letter to me, addressed to Eleanor, ended with a plea to do what was right to somehow make amends for the past. But how? The wronged party, Thomas, the gifted artist and craftsman, he would be long gone. His life potentially ruined by my family's actions. Did he have descendants? Did they know about the injustice? The weight of the responsibility settled heavily upon me. I had inherited a fortune built on a foundation of betrayal and injustice. My comfortable life, the security I had known, was intertwined with this dark family secret. Ignoring it felt impossible. a betrayal of Great Aunt Beatrice's dying wish and my own sense of morality. I knew I had to try and find out what happened to Thomas, to see if there were any descendants, to somehow shed light on the injustice and potentially offer some form of restitution. My search began with researching Thomas, the gifted artist and craftsman, the man wronged by my family. Using the details from Great Aunt Beatrice's journals, his name, his profession, the approximate time period, I began searching for information about him. It was a challenging search. Records from that era were often incomplete, and Thomas's name, while not extremely common, was not unique. I looked for any mention of an artist or craftsman named Thomas in the region during the 1920s, searching through old art directories, newspaper articles about local artists, and historical records of guilds or associations. I found scattered mentions of a Thomas Sullivan. His last name was mentioned once in the journals, who worked as a skilled craftsman in the area, known for his beautiful wood carvings. The dates and location aligned with Great Aunt Beatrice's timeline, but the mentions faded after the early 1920s, suggesting he had either moved away or ceased his work. Did the betrayal ruin him completely? Did it force him to abandon his craft, his passion? The thought was heartbreaking. I searched for any records of a later life for Thomas Sullivan, marriage records, death records, census data. It was difficult to be certain without more specific information. But I found a record of a Thomas Sullivan who died in a different state years later, his occupation listed as a laborer. Could this be the same man, forced into manual labor after his reputation was ruined? The possibility was devastating. Did he have a family? Children? The records were unclear. It was difficult to trace descendants without a clear line of connection. My search felt like walking through a historical fog, trying to piece together a life from fragmented clues. The weight of the secret, the burden of the potential injustice, grew heavier with each unanswered question. Chapter 4. The search for Thomas Sullivan and his descendants was a frustrating and emotionally draining process. The information in Great Aunt Beatrice's journals was limited, and tracing a life that had potentially been derailed by a past injustice, a life that may have been deliberately obscured, was incredibly difficult. I felt a growing sense of despair. Was it possible that the legacy of this injustice was simply a story buried in old journals, a wrong that could never be righted? The thought of living with this knowledge, of benefiting from a fortune built on someone else's ruin, without being able to offer any form of amends, was almost unbearable. The elegant house, the beautiful antiques, the comfortable life I now had, it all felt tainted, a constant reminder of the unseen cost of our family's prosperity. Just as I was about to give up, convinced that Thomas Sullivan and his story were lost to time, I had a chance encounter. I was at a local historical fair, browsed through tables of antique photographs and documents, drawn by my newfound interest in the past, an interest sparked by Great Aunt Beatrice's journals. I struck up a conversation with a vendor, an older woman who specialized in local history and genealogy. I mentioned my interest in the history of the area, in old families, specifically the Sullivan family who had lived in town years ago, the ones connected to the hardware business. It was a subtle way of probing, hoping to find a connection. "Oh, the Sullivans," she said, her eyes lighting up. "Yes, a long-standing family in this area. The hardware store was on Main Street years ago, run by the Thomas Sullivans. There were several of them, over the generations, a common name in that family. I'm interested in a specific Thomas Sullivan, I said, trying to be more direct. An artist, a craftsman. Lived here in the 1920s? She paused, thinking. An artist? A craftsman? She frowned slightly. That doesn't sound like the Main Street Sullivans. They were all hardware men, as far as I know. Practical types. Though, she paused again, her eyes narrowing in thought. There was a branch of the family, a bit separate, lived out towards the edge of town. Thomas was the name of the father. They were known for their skilled hands, their woodworking. Thomas Sullivan. Yes, I remember hearing about him. Very talented, they said. His wife was Eleanor, and they had a daughter. Eleanor. My breath hitched. Thomas Sullivan. Eleanor. A daughter named Eleanor, a branch of the family separate from the Main Street Sullivans. This felt like a crucial piece of the puzzle. Do you know what happened to that family? I asked, my voice trembling. Did they stay in the area? No, she said, shaking her head. They left, quite suddenly, as I recall. Back in the 1920s. There was some kind of trouble, I heard. Something about a dispute. They just packed up and left. Never heard from again. Trouble. A dispute. Leaving suddenly. It fit the timeline of the inheritance dispute. The betrayal in Great-Aunt Beatrice's journals. Did they have any other children? I asked, focusing on the daughter, Eleanor. I believe there was just the one daughter, the vendor said. Eleanor, a lovely girl, they said. Talented, like her father. Eleanor, Thomas Sullivan's daughter. My great-aunt Beatrice's letter was addressed to Eleanor. Not to me, Clara, but to Eleanor. My middle name, the name of Thomas Sullivan's daughter. The meaning, the connection, suddenly became clear, devastatingly clear. Great-Aunt Beatrice's letter wasn't just for me. It was from her, addressed to the daughter of the man she had betrayed, a woman named Eleanor, my namesake. The letter was a confession, an apology, a transfer of responsibility, not just to me, but to the descendant of the man she had wronged, a descendant who shared my middle name. Great-Aunt Beatrice, in her final act, was not just entrusting me with the truth. She was trying to connect me with the wronged party, with Eleanor, Thomas Sullivan's daughter, knowing that we shared a name, hoping that somehow this connection would lead to the truth being revealed and amends being made. Chapter 5. The revelation that Great-Aunt Beatrice's letter was addressed to Eleanor, the daughter of Thomas Sullivan, the man my family had wronged, brought a profound and heartbreaking clarity to the mystery. It wasn't just a mistake with my name. It was a deliberate act, a message intended to reach the descendant of the wronged party, a descendant who shared my middle name, a link connecting the past and the present in a way that felt both tragic and fated. Great-Aunt Beatrice, carrying the weight of her guilt for decades, had hoped that by leaving the key, the journals and the letter addressed to Eleanor, she would somehow facilitate a connection between her family and the family they had wronged, allowing the truth to be revealed and amends to be made. My search for Eleanor Sullivan, Thomas Sullivan's daughter, became a quest not just to fulfill Great-Aunt Beatrice's final wish, but to understand the full impact of the injustice, to connect with the descendant of the man whose life my family's actions had potentially ruined. Using the information from the historical fair vendor and online genealogical resources, I began tracing the life of Eleanor Sullivan, born in the 1920s. It was a challenging search, but eventually, I found records suggesting she had married and moved to a different state. Tracing her married name took time, but I found a potential match, a woman named Eleanor Johnson, living in a quiet town several states away, her age aligning with what Eleanor Sullivan would be. Finding contact information for Eleanor Johnson was another step, requiring patience and careful research. When I finally found a phone number, my hand trembled as I dialed. The weight of 80 years of history pressing down on me. "Hello?" A voice older but clear and kind answered. "Hello," I said, my voice a little shaky. Is this Eleanor Johnson, formerly Eleanor Sullivan?" There was a pause. "Yes," she said, sounding surprised. "Who is this?" "My name is Clara Davis," I said, taking a deep breath. "My middle name is Eleanor. I believe our families may have a connection from a long time ago, related to my great-aunt, Beatrice Vance, and your father, Thomas Sullivan." Another pause, longer this time. Then a soft gasp. "Beatrice," she whispered, "and my father, Thomas Sullivan." I explained about great-aunt Beatrice's passing, the inheritance, the hidden box, the journals, and the letter addressed to Eleanor. I explained the story revealed in the journals, the inheritance dispute, the betrayal of her father, the injustice committed against him. Eleanor listened in stunned silence, occasionally interjecting with a quiet, "Oh my," or "I had no idea." She had known her father's family had lost their business, that they had left their hometown suddenly. But the full story, the details of the injustice, had been kept hidden from her. Her father rarely spoke of that time, the pain and shame too deep. "My father was a gifted craftsman," Eleanor said, her voice filled with sadness. "He loved his work. But after we left, after the trouble, he never really worked with wood again. He took on whatever jobs he could find. It broke his heart, I think, to lose his craft, to lose his name." The confirmation of the devastating impact on Thomas's life sent a fresh wave of sorrow through me. My family's actions had not just cost him an inheritance, they had taken away his passion, his livelihood, a part of his identity. I told Eleanor about great-aunt Beatrice's guilt, the burden she had carried, her final wish for the truth to be known and for amends to be made. I explained about the fortune I had inherited, a fortune built on the foundation of the injustice committed against her father. I told her that I believed a significant portion of that fortune rightfully belonged to her family, as restitution for what was taken. It wasn't about simply handing over money. It was about acknowledging the wrong, about sharing the legacy that had been built on their loss, about attempting to right the historical injustice. Eleanor was overwhelmed, emotional. It was a lot to take in, a lifetime of hidden history, a sudden revelation of a past wrong and a potential path towards justice. She needed time to process, to talk to her own family. We stayed in touch, talking regularly, slowly building a connection forged in the shared knowledge of our family's intertwined hidden history. We were two women from different generations, from families who had been on opposite sides of a past injustice, now brought together by a hidden box, a wooden key, and a letter addressed to a name that connected us both. The legal process of transferring assets, of establishing a fund for Eleanor and any other living descendants of Thomas Sullivan was complex and took time. But it was a process I undertook with a sense of moral responsibility, a commitment to honoring Great Aunt Beatrice's final wish and the legacy of the truth she had entrusted to me. Meeting Eleanor in person was a deeply moving experience. She was a kind, resilient woman with a quiet strength that reminded me of the artist her father was. We shared stories about our lives, about our families, about the fathers we had known, the lives they had lived, and the hidden histories they had carried. There was no lingering anger or resentment from Eleanor. The wrong had been committed by a previous generation, and she saw my actions as an attempt to right a historical injustice, a gesture of honesty and compassion. Forgiveness, in this context, wasn't about absolving past actions, but about acknowledging the truth and finding a path towards healing and a different kind of family connection. The elegant house, the unexpected fortune, they no longer felt like a burden of guilt, but a legacy transformed, a legacy built on a past wrong, now acknowledged, shared, and used in part to bring some form of justice to the descendants of the man whose life was tragically altered. Great Aunt Beatrice's hidden compartment, the wooden key, the journals, the letter addressed to Eleanor. They were not just relics of a hidden past, but catalysts for revelation, for reconciliation, for profound understanding of the complex threads that weave together family histories, the enduring impact of past choices, and the possibility of finding peace and connection by facing the truth, no matter how difficult it may be. My quiet, ordinary life had been unexpectedly intertwined with a dramatic hidden history, a history that brought a sense of responsibility and a profound connection to a family I never knew existed, all thanks to a key that unlocked more than just a box. It unlocked a hidden past and a path towards a different kind of future.